In short, I will guide you to code the delete user function of the user module in the Shopee admin application. In the user listing page, if the admin wants to delete a user, he can click the chest icon next to a user here, and a delete confirmation dialog appears here asking, are you sure you want to delete this user with ID number and followed by the full name of the user. In the modal dialog, if the no button is clicked, nothing happens. It just dismisses the dialog. If the yes button is clicked, it will remove the user from the database and displays a successful message. The user ID followed by the ID number has been deleted successfully. In case no user found with the given ID, the message is could not find any user with ID followed by the ID number. So in Java code, we need to implement the delete user method in the user controller class to handle the request for removing a user from the listing page, and it will invoke the delete method implemented in the user service class, and to check the existence of a user, it will invoke the count by ID method declared in the user repository. If the user is found, it will call the delete by ID method to remove the user from the database. In case no user is found with the given ID, throws the user not found exception. The count by ID method in the user repository interface, and implement the delete method in the user service class, and implement the delete user method in the user controller class, and finally we implement the delete confirmation dialog lastly. Come back to the project, and we need to update the user repository interface to declare a new method that is public long count by ID. This method follows the convention specified by Spring Data JPA, so we don't have to specify any SQL statement, any query, and pass the parameter ID here. That's it, and very simple. And then we need to write a simple test method to test this count by ID method in the user repository test here. The new test method name is test count by ID, and I want to count the user with this ID equal 100, and of course there's no user exists in the database with this ID. Repo count by ID, and it returns a long value count, and we assert that count by ID is not null and is greater than 0. Okay, run this test method, and the first time it should fail because no user exists in the database with the given ID 100. You see the test failed. Yeah, you see expecting 0 to be greater than 0. Now let me modify the ID here to ID which is of a user in the database, ID 1 here for the user name Hamin here, ID 1, and run the test again, and this time it should succeed. You see it succeeds with the green check mark here. Perfect. Then we come to update the user service class to implement a new method that will remove a user. So the new method is delete public void delete with a given ID, integer ID. And firstly, we need to count the user by ID. User repo count by ID. Count by ID, and we check if count by ID is null, or count by ID is equal 0, meaning that no user exists in the database with this given ID. Then we throw an exception, user not found exception. So we can copy the throw statement here and declare the throw declaration in the method signature. Add throw declaration here. Otherwise, we just delegate the code to user repo, delete by ID. The reason that we need to call count by ID because we don't want to call the get method that returns a full user object with all the details. Instead, for the purpose of checking the existence of a user, we can use a count by ID method that just returns a number, a long number. Then open the user listing page and update the hyperlink for the delete button. Okay, here's a link for delete user here, and we specify the URL is th:/href equal to /user/delete and followed by the user ID. Okay, and refresh the user listing page here, and we set the title for this hyperlink. Title equal delete this user. Refresh and you can see the title here, delete this user. Click delete user Nam Ha Minh, and we got the white label error page, and you can see the URL /user/delete/ followed by the ID of user being deleted. And then we need to implement the corresponding handler method in the user controller class. User controller class here. Okay, we need to write a new method similar to the edit user method. So we can copy and paste the code here and then modify. The method name is delete user, and the URL mapping is user/delete/ followed by the ID. And here in the body of the method, we call the method delete of the user service class, similar to the code in the edit user method. So we can copy paste and modify. Here we call service delete passing the user ID, and this method doesn't return anything. No rows, no attributes. Okay, just call delete on the user service class. And in case if user not found exception is thrown, we direct to the user listing page with the message is from the exception. And here we need to set the successful message. Redirect attribute, add flash attribute message, and the successful message is the user ID plus ID plus has been deleted successfully. And finally, in both cases, we return direct to the user listing page. Okay, save the changes. Now we are ready to test deleting a user, but without the confirmation dialog first. Okay, and I want to remove the user build guest here. Click the chast icon here, and you can see the message the user ID 9 has been deleted successfully, and you can see no more user build guest here. Let me check the database. You see the user build guest here with ID 9, and now I execute the SQL statement again, and you can see that user ID 9 has been deleted from the database. Perfect. Now let's try to delete the user with the ID does not exist in the database. Somehow we pass the user ID in the URL like this, delete user 999, and you can see the message is could not find any user with ID 999. Perfect, right? Next, I'm going to show you how to implement the delete confirmation dialog that looks like this using Bootstrap and jQuery. Firstly, we need to update the delete hyperlink in the user listing page here. So we give the link special class name is link dash delete, and we write some JavaScript code before the closing body tag here. Script document ready function, and we add event handler for the link with this class link dash delete. So we use the query selector for a class here dot link dash delete, and on the click event of this link we execute this function. This is a event handler, and we call prevent default here to prevent the default behavior of a hyperlink, so where we can execute our custom code here. Now for testing purpose, we just alert the URL of the hyperlink, alert with this refers to the link itself, and then we call this attribute. The attribute name is sref here. Okay. Refresh the user listing page user here, and view page source to make sure that we have JavaScript code here. Here you see. Okay, and click the delete button next to the user ID here, and you can see the alert message with the URL used to delete the user here, ID 3 here. Okay. Then we need to create a modal dialog inside the user listing page here. In the user form page, we also have a modal dialog for showing the email uniqueness checking here. Here you see. So we can reuse this code in the user listing page. Users and paste just right above the footer here, and we set the ID for this modal dialog is delete confirm modal, and remove the ID for the title here, and the title is delete confirmation. And in the footer we have two buttons here, button yes and button no here. Okay, here's a button close. We change the caption to button no, and for the yes button we use the hyperlink here with the class is btn dash success to display the button in green color, and href equal to blank. And in the body here we set a text, static text here to Are you sure you want to delete this user ID? And write JavaScript statement to show the model dialog. Comment this line and we select the model dialog by ID. Confirm model, and call the method model here. And let's test. Use the listing page and click the chart icon here. You can see the delete confirmation dialog appears here. Are you sure you want to delete this user ID? We need to set the text for this link. Yes, here. We can set ID for this span here. ID confirm text. So we can dynamically set the confirmation text that includes the user ID. Here we select that span, confirm text, and set the text is here. Then we pass the user ID. User ID we get from the hyperlink itself. So in the hyperlink delete here, we specify a special attribute. Here, get user ID equal user.id, and then in the JavaScript code we can get the attribute of the link. Link equal to this here, and link attribute user ID. Okay, let's test again. Refresh the user listing and click chart icon, and you can see the confirmation message is, are you sure you want to delete this user ID one? Perfect, right? And I want to set the question mark here. Okay, refresh, and I click the chart icon next to the user with ID 6. Mike gets here, and you can see, are you sure you want to delete this user ID 6? Perfect, right? Click no to dismiss the dialog. And finally we set the delete hyperlink for the yes button here. So we need to give ID for this a tag ID yes button, and then here we set URL attribute sref for that hyperlink button. We use the query selector yes button and attribute sref. We update the sref attribute pointing to the attribute sref of the link sref here. That's it, and we are ready to test the delete user function with the confirmation dialog. Users, and I want to delete the user name at codejava.net John Doe here. Click the chart icon here and click yes, and you see the user ID 8 has been deleted successfully. Perfect, right? Let me check in the database. User ID 8 here, execute SQL select statement, and you can see it has gone. Okay, and let's test again. Try to delete the user Mohammed. Click here. No, you see nothing happens. Delete and click yes, and you see the user ID 10 has been deleted successfully.